All right, board. So next thing on our agenda is to discuss the complaints that we're receiving for people not wearing masks in the common area.
Can you hear me?
Hey, did you take the dog out yet?
Hear me?
Oh yeah, can you do that, please? It's gonna pee all over the carpet, and I can't clean that again.
Hello?
There's a
Can you
mute
hear-
button, Matt.
What?
Where?
There is.
Can you hear
Where?
me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Ruby.
Apparently they can
Like,
hear what
you
I'm
gotta
saying.
push the button, Matt. There's a mute button.
Yeah, I muted myself, so it's fine.
Okay, Zoom 101. Okay,
Yeah.
so just don't push your mute buttons right now.
No earworm medication tonight.
Hello?
Matt, we can hear you.
Hello?
Jessica, are those your cats? They're so cute. I'm gonna adopt them.
Okay.
Should. They
let's
are. They're
back to
adorable.
the subject, guys. Can you all
Oh my God,
get
I'm gonna do it.
back to the
Yes,
subject?
they're
Jessica, what do you think about this mask situation? What should
Helen,
we do?
why do you always call on her? Is it because she's blonde?
Oh,
No, Marcia, she gives us great answers. But I could ask you, Marcia, what do you think?
Nothing. I just didn't want you to call on her. That's all.
Okay.
oh God.
All right, great.
Yeah, Marcia and Jessica are at it again. Can you believe
Okay,
it?
what? Yeah. Why don't we take a 5-minute break and we'll come back?
All right.
Can you hear me?
Oh, thank God we're taking a break.
Welcome, board members, and thank you for your volunteerism. Without you, you would not be able to sustain your communities, and so it's so important to have volunteers just like you. So you've decided to volunteer and become a board member, but now what? How do you know what you're supposed to do? What are your next steps? And before we talk about that, let's talk about what's your why? Everybody has to have a reason for deciding to join their board. Perhaps your reason is that you are so interested in money, power, and fame. After all, we all know how much money you board members make, and we also know how much you get raised each year. Or how about that GEICO commercial that painted board members in such a great light? Maybe it's because you have gone to board meeting after board meeting and you've talked to the board about enhancing the building aesthetics, and you're tired of seeing the building unpainted. And so you've decided to get on the board to really move projects forward. Or, I don't know, maybe it's because you've received violation letters and you've gotten so angry at a particular board member that you feel has targeted you, and you've decided to overthrow that board and take control. Well, whatever your reasons, at the end of the day, when you become a board member, you are now a fiduciary. You have an obligation to the association, and it is no longer about the wants of one, but the needs of the whole. So that's important to consider when you embark on your journey as a board member. So let's talk about step one. You're a leader in the community now. As a board member, all decisions, all actions that you make must be done in good faith. And so let's talk about and drill down a little bit more what the responsibilities, the fundamental responsibilities of board members entail. So first and foremost, it's to enforce the governing documents, to maintain the common area, to manage your finances, and manage your operations. So let's get into that a little bit deeper. So let's talk about board responsibility number one, enforcing governing documents. So enforcing governing documents really pertains to rules and regulations, CC&Rs, architectural guidelines, and bylaws. But it also really relates to civil codes, corporations codes, and this doesn't really encompass all of the areas that the board is responsible to enforce, but just some. Next slide, please. It's not about just enforcing what exists. We know we don't have, as a board, control over the laws, but we do have control over the CC&Rs, the bylaws, the general association's governing documents. It's always important, whether you're a brand new board member or you've served on the board in the past, it's really important to take a look at your governing documents and have a discussion with your board on whether or not the governing documents are still relevant. Perhaps you have rules and regulations that are 20 years old. You have a new demographic of owners since the time that they were first adopted. And maybe there are some things in there like electric vehicles and charging stations that were not relevant at the time, but certainly have become more prevalent now. These are things that you really should consider incorporating into the rules. So as a board, it's important to always annually consider, revise, draft, adopt, and then also enforce governing documents. Next slide, please. Now, when you enforce your governing documents, you also want to make sure that you are uniformly enforcing them. For example, let's say you have the community's, I don't know, the person that's not so well liked in the community, and you're doing your site inspections and you notice that they have some unsightly materials on their balcony. And so you're very thrilled that you get to ask your community manager to write a violation letter. But then your next door neighbor, who happens to also be your best friend and part of your book club, has similar unsightly materials on their balcony. And then you decide, well, I'll just give her a call because she's my friend and I don't need to send a violation letter to her. Well, keep in mind that board members can in fact get in trouble if they don't uniformly enforce their governing documents. Also consider new laws. Now again, I commend you board members for being here. And yes, it's your job to rely on professionals. That is part of the business judgment rule, which is to rely on professional guidance to make decisions. But new laws come into effect all the time. In fact, I want to say as a community manager, there have been new laws, more new laws in the last 3 years than probably the last 17 years combined in my career. And it's so important to keep up with those new laws and understand how they impact your community association. And again, changes in your environment. For example, as we talk about new laws and also changes in the environment, earlier this year, we learned that there were new election laws that changed the way that we worked on elections as we knew it. We had to all adopt new election rules and enforce them throughout the community. So as times change, so must we, and so must our governing documents. Next slide, please. The next responsibility is managing our operations. So we have corporate management as well as property management. And I'm going to go back and stress, it's so important to hire and rely on professionals to help you with these operations. I love that board members, basically the people that we work with come from all walks of life, and they all have different areas of expertise. We have teachers that serve on the board, we have accountants, we have general contractors, but at the end of the day, no one person is a jack of all trades. And so while we might have various levels of expertise, you're not expected as a board member to run your personal life as well as fully run and manage another business. Even if your association is not incorporated, it is still a business. And so you are entitled and you should hire professionals to help you run that business and offer guidance. Next slide, please. So as you're managing your operations, again, this is an area that is usually passed on to community association managers. You have day-to-day matters, such as, are the landscapers tending to the landscaping? Is the pool company coming out to service the pool? You have contracts with vendors, which need to be not just executed, but supervised. Insurance needs, so there's a lot that goes into the day-to-day operations when it comes to the property itself. Next slide, please. Now, another area is maintaining the common areas. Now, do you even know what your common areas are? This is something that I find to be really interesting. As a board member, you really should get to know your common areas and understand what that encompasses. Yes, you certainly can rely on legal counsel and you should rely on your community association manager. But when you become a board member, it's really important to try to get a good understanding of your governing documents, which will spell out what common areas belong or what common areas exactly belong to the association. And also keep in mind, it's not just common areas, but you have exclusive use common areas, and it's important to understand maintenance responsibilities of exclusive use common areas as well. Next slide. When you're looking at the governing documents, the best place to look to identify what common areas really include is your CC&Rs, condo plans. I don't know why, but condo plans seem to disappear, but you can always request and pay a nominal fee to request for a copy of your condo plans with the county recorder's office. And the condo plans actually do provide more details than your CC&Rs and help shed some light on some gray areas in terms of what is owner responsibility and what is the association's responsibility. And then we also rely upon civil code, the Davis-Sterling Act. Sometimes the Davis-Sterling Act will help identify what common areas or exclusive use common areas really look like if your governing documents are vague or silent. Next slide, please. Now remember, it is the board's responsibility to maintain your common areas. And I did want to bring up this very specific incident because this has always been a problem and always been something that we have to educate our board members about. Now, when you're in condominium complexes, for example, your subfloors, your ceilings, adjoining walls oftentimes are labeled as common areas. And we know that the board and the association is responsible to maintain those common areas. Now, what happens if an element inside of a unit causes damage to the subfloors, the ceilings, or adjoining walls? For example, maybe it's a component in someone's bathtub and it causes a huge leak, and we have damage to these components. Many times, board members will tell us as their community managers to hold the unit owner responsible for the leak, accountable to make all the repairs. We often have to remind board members that even though somebody else was responsible and it wasn't a common area that caused the damage, the association still has an obligation to maintain, preserve, and repair common areas if and when they are damaged. So it's important as a board and as an association, in instances where common areas are impacted and damaged, for the board to get involved and make sure that the repairs are done. And in those instances, we pursue reimbursement assessments against the responsible party. So this is just one area in terms of maintenance of common areas that we find board members tend to overlook and want to just pass on the responsibility in these instances. Next slide, please. Lastly, and probably most importantly, we need to talk about maintaining finances. This is a huge responsibility of the board. And I want to go back to something that we talked about earlier, which was when you become a board member, it's not just about the one, it's now about the good of the community as a whole. I know we heard from Adrian and Association Reserves earlier today, and they talked about the importance of reserve studies and importance of funding your reserves. But this is something that I also wanted to expound upon and really kind of drill in, because as a board member, yes, we understand that sometimes you make decisions that really kind of personally impact you. But when the association needs short-term funding as well as long-term funding, it's really important as a board member, as a fiduciary, to consider the decisions that you make and consider the financial impacts, not just for today, but for future boards and future years. Next slide, please. The board's responsibility as it pertains to reviewing financials really includes doing just that, which is reviewing the financials on a monthly basis, preparing your budget and adopting it, conducting a reserve study, and filing taxes. Next slide, please. When you're looking at your association's budget, it's important to also really take a look at your reserve study. Now, I personally like to recommend that after a board is elected, the board holds an organizational meeting. The purpose of that is really to talk as a group about the goals and the direction that the board has and make sure that you all are on the same page, that you have sort of an end purpose. What is the board's purpose? What is it that you're hoping to achieve? And part of that process, it's really important to take a look at your reserve study, because that's another great guide to know what components are up for replacement at that point in time. Are you going to address them? Are you going to work with your community manager to address them? And also take a look at the finances when you first start as a board member for that year. Are the finances adequate to deal with some of the components that are listed in the reserve studies that year, or are they insufficient? How does it look for the next 5 years? Again, while you may not be on the board and have no intention of serving for multiple years, the decisions that you make today will certainly impact the boards and the community in the future. So you need to make sure that you have adequate funds for not just the common area maintenance, which is the day-to-day and the operation, but also for capital improvements. Next slide, please. Now, if you don't follow guidelines and you're not as a board member, you believe that you're just a volunteer and you're held harmless because, you know, at the end of the day, you have great intentions. It's important to understand that you have to follow the business judgment rules and you must act in good faith. As a board, yes, there is directors and officers insurance that will help protect and preserve the board from any liability. But if any board member is found to not be acting in the good faith and best interest of the community or the business as a whole, individual directors may be held liable for decisions that they make. So always keep that in mind. I can't stress enough how important it is to consider the business itself, not just your own personal wants and needs. Next slide, please. If you always act in good faith and you put the association first, you have nothing to worry about. You're ensuring a strong partnership with your community, with your board, with your managing agents, the professionals that you hire, and you will have great success. Thank you, and I wish you all of the success as you embark on your journey as a board member. And again, I want to personally thank you for your volunteerism. I know the job is often thankless, and we don't hear it enough. You don't hear it enough. So I want to really stress how much we appreciate you and how much we appreciate your service to the community and our industry. Enjoy the rest of the presentations. Our next speaker is somebody that I am truly honored to introduce to you today, and I thank her very much for dedicating her time to help educate board members. Sandra Gottlieb is one of California's leading community association attorneys and a founding partner of Swedelson Gottlieb, which limits its practice to the representation of California homeowners associations, including condominiums, planned developments, and cooperatives. She's been practicing law for over 40 years, and she's provided legal counsel to community associations since the mid-'80s. Sandra herself has lived in 2 condominium associations, including a master and sub-association and a planned development. Sandra's extensive negotiating skill acquired in the early years of her practice has given her the ability to work with volunteer board members, associations, managing agents, and opposing counsel to achieve intended results and to provide sound counsel regarding association operational issues. I can list the long list of accolades and her background, but I will say this. Sandra was one of the first instructors that I personally experienced in my career early on. She taught ethics, she taught law, and I was simply in awe of her at that time, almost 20 years ago. I've since then had the pleasure and the privilege of standing side by side with her, and we had the opportunity to speak at some of Community Association Institute's events. Sandra is truly an authority in legal arenas in Southern California, and we're all so privileged to have her here today. Thank you, Sandra, for being here, and we look forward to hearing what you have to share.
Thank you for that introduction, Neda, and thank you so much for asking me to join today. I appreciate it so much. AB 3182, or the 4 numbers that have become the bane of my existence. This new statute, California Civil Code 4740 and 4741, effective January 1st of 2021, is probably the most important pieces of legislation that has hit homeowners associations in the last decade. And we thought last year with election rules that applied, and we know now that fails in comparison. I am Sandra Gottlieb, managing partner of Swedelson Gottlieb, and my contact information is on the next slide. I appreciate you joining us today and appreciate so much my having the opportunity to share with you. Next slide. AB 3182. This is a housing and homelessness crisis solution in California. Our governor recognizes that we have to build 258,000 properties, homes each year just to stay even with our housing needs. And that isn't happening. California legislature decided to do something about it. And what they did is decide to take units from homeowners associations that we all thought were protected by governing documents, CC&Rs, recorded against properties with all kinds of restrictions on leasing, and say those will no longer apply after January 1st, 2021. The bill's author estimates millions of homes will become rentals with the passing of this bill. CAI, GLAC, and CLAC, California Legislative Action Committee, fought hard to change this legislation, to get the author to throw it by the wayside, and with all of the efforts, were unsuccessful in doing so. So the next slide will show us Civil Code Section 4740. This provision says that an owner shall not be subject to a provision in a governing document or an amendment that prohibits leasing of the unit unless that governing document was effective prior to the date the owner acquired title. This is really a revolutionary concept that, once again, we are dealing with in homeowners associations, unless the governing documents were effective prior. So do you know what has actually changed here? What has changed is that any preference that you have in your governing documents to leasing, unless your governing documents magically have a 25% limitation on leasing as a cap, or unless your documents say that any leases must be 30 days or more, your documents will no longer be valid. Some people believe that an association do not have to amend their documents to comply with the new statute. We know that is not the case because the statute specifically says, as we will discuss in a moment in the next slide, that you have to amend your documents in order to proceed. So Civil Code Section 4741 provides specifically at subsection A that an owner shall not be subject to a provision in the governing documents or an amendment that prohibits, has the effect of prohibiting, or unreasonably restricts renting any separate interest, which includes accessory dwelling units or junior accessory dwelling units. It's pretty clear to me and must be abundantly clear to you. This affects all governing documents. Let's take a second and look at the next slide. This slide specifically breaks down the wording, has the effect of prohibiting. And what does that mean? It means that a restriction that results in an owner not being able to rent their unit will no longer be effective. And it includes things such as a waiting period. Many sets of governing documents specifically say there will be a 1-year waiting period before a new owner can rent their unit, or a requirement that an owner rent their entire interest to one household, including the accessory dwelling unit or any ADU or JADU. We now know that the California legislature, in the next slide, was really out of their minds and out of this stratosphere when they said unreasonably restricts and actually gave us a definition. The restriction that is not justified in fact or circumstance that impacts the ability to rent a separate interest, it will be void. It could mean that you could have a reasonable restriction, but if it is not a reasonable restriction that doesn't meet the two fact patterns, 25% and leasing restrictions no more than 30 days in duration, an association will not be able to enforce any leasing restrictions at all. One of the other things that we look for and will be deemed to be unreasonable is if an association has placed high fees and costs on rental use so that an owner would be unreasonably burdened by those high fees and costs before they rented their unit. Let's look at rental caps. What am I talking about? The new statute prohibits the enforcement of any provision in the governing document or an amendment to the governing document that restricts 25% of the separate interest. So if your current governing documents say that your rental restriction amount, the cap, is 25% of all units, you're the only association in California that will not have to amend their governing documents. And the important part here is to understand that the ADU and JADU is no longer considered a separate interest, which means if an owner is living within the separate interest, we'll call it in the main home on the property, then the property will not be counted towards the rental cap, even if part of the property is rented to a tenant. And that includes renting one unit or one room in a home, or the excessive dwelling units in the backyard. Looking at the next slide, rental terms. This is the 30-day maximum restriction. So we know that many associations have either in their recorded CC&Rs or in the governing documents themselves, rules and regulations, a restriction on rentals and say that rentals must be a certain period of time, such as 90 days, 6 months. The new statute says the only limitation you may have is 30 days. That's the longest term that an association can actually require a homeowner to have this restriction in place. It's a brand new day for all of us in this industry. 90 days and 1 year is no longer allowed, and the statute requires you remove those terms from the association's governing documents. On the next slide, we will talk about enforcement. What is the enforcement on this? I'm going to say this two different ways, and I'm doing it on purpose. Community associations will be required to comply with the law on January 1, 2021, regardless of whether their governing documents have been amended to comply with the law. So you're held responsible for compliance, even if your CC&Rs state otherwise. Said another way, community associations are prohibited from enforcing provisions in their governing documents that don't comply with the law effective January 1, 2021. What is an association to do in the stopgap, knowing that it takes a while to get a document out to the homeowners for an amendment approval via the secret ballot process? One of the things we can do is set forth in the next slide is look at that December 31, 2021 date, and frankly, move backwards so we can calendar the time frame. In the next slide, we address why wait. If our rules and CC&Rs don't comply and we cannot enforce them effective January 1, 2021, and we don't have enough time to amend the CC&Rs between now and the end of the year, what an association should do is prepare rules and regulations that are compliant with the new statute for enforcement effectiveness on January 1st, 2021. These rules will put the association in a defensible position so that if the new law wipes out the restrictions in your CC&Rs, which are the recorded documents, you will have no enforcement rights. It's a zero-sum game. So if you have rules and regulations that are approved by the board and go out for the 28-day comment period, you will then be able to enforce the rules and regulations so long as they are within the 25% rental cap and the 30-day rental period. The next question is, does this default to the law? And it does not default to the law. That's important to know since most of our statutes in the Davis-Sterling Act actually do default to the law. And here's the thing, and sorry about this, there is no grandfathering under this new law. There's no free ride for the people who are living in associations and own their units as of January 1st, 2021. So what do we mean by no grandfathering? Let's look at the next slide. Grandfathering means we don't have the ability to say people who are here are no longer going to be affected by the new law because we are covered by this traditional grandfathering. Rather, everybody has to comply. And as my first slide addressed, everything means everyone. So what do? We amend our governing documents. We first are going to prepare those interim rules, and we're going to follow those newly adopted election rules for community associations. And almost simultaneously, your legal counsel and your board of directors will work together in preparing the amendments to your association's CC&Rs that will go out for secret ballot vote by the owners. Is there any exception to this balloting? Let's look at our next slide. An exception can be if you are the one set of CC&Rs that actually have a 25% rental cap and require no more than a 30-day period for leasing. If you have a lower threshold for leasing, 7 days or 25 days, and you have the 25% rental cap, you will be the exception to that balloting as well. So what if the homeowners don't vote? Well, there is a provision in the California Civil Code that says if the homeowners don't vote en masse, but we do have at least 50 plus 1% of the owners voting, we can petition the court to approve the CC&Rs so that the approval is court mandated as opposed to owner approved. Not voting and not amending the CC&Rs literally could result in no rental terms and no rental caps for your association after that magic December 31, 2021 date. Let's look at our next slide. So what happens if an association doesn't comply with the new law? The damages are significant. $1,000 civil penalty plus damages, which is likely loss of rental income from each person who is damaged by the failure to comply. It is important to note, however, that the statute uses the word willfully, willful non-compliance. And what that means to us as practitioners is the board does everything possible, for example, prepares the rules that we have discussed after the first of the year or before, amend the governing documents, sending out secret ballots to the homeowners for their approval. And if that vote does not pass, and if there is not 51 plus 1% of the homeowners in favor of the amendment to the governing documents, we believe that a court would be hard-pressed to hold an association responsible for a willful violation. Put on your seatbelts. We're going to have a bumpy ride. Thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate being involved in this fabulous event.
All right, everyone. Thank you and have a wonderful day. Oh, thank God. Got a long commute back home. Oh, all right. Here we go. Here we go. Oh, 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 oh. Oh. All right, let's see what we got on the old boob tube. It's raining? What, roof leak? It's raining sideways? Why is there hail in California? Oh, the HOA is going to hear about this. They never take care of anything. Ah! Ah! Marsha!
Our next speaker is Dan Huertas with ADCO Roofing. Dan Huertas joined ADCO Roofing in 2016 as a project manager. He has been in the roofing industry for 17 years. He has worked with most residential home builders in Southern California, homeowners associations, and property management companies. He brings his knowledge and expertise in the installation and maintenance of residential and commercial roof systems. He prides himself in being attentive to clients and exceeding their expectations. I know he certainly has achieved that with our community managers. He enjoys playing guitar and spending time with his family. Dan, let us hear what you have to share with us today.
Hi, and thank you for joining us today. Welcome to ADCO Roofing and Waterproofing's presentation. Today, we're going to be looking at roofing, waterproofing, and preventative maintenance. We'll be looking at signs that let us know when a roof needs to be replaced. So please join us. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to be discussing 5 different topics. We'll begin by talking about our safety program, then the importance of a preventative maintenance program. Then we'll be looking at signs and indicators that let us know when a roof needs to be replaced. Then we're going to be looking at the different roof systems installed on flat and slope roofs. And we'll conclude by talking about our free inspection program here at ADCO Roofing. We focus on safety. It is our priority to make sure our employees make it home safely at the end of each workday. They go through weekly, monthly, and daily safety training to ensure that employees, as well as homeowners, are kept safe. This is our focus, and this is our goal. I want to give you a little background about ADCO Roofing. We were established in 1989, and our goal is to provide excellent service, the best workmanship, and the best products available in the market today. We work with HOAs, apartment complexes, senior living communities, financial institutions, general contractors, medical facilities, manufacturing facilities, warehouse and distribution centers, and commercial buildings. So let's discuss roof maintenance. It all begins with a roof inspection. We recommend the roofs to be inspected at least once a year. During this inspection, we look at the different components on the roof, such as vent pipes, roof curbs. We look at roof seams, roof edges. We look at gutters and waterways. We want to make sure the roof is properly working. We also want to make sure that everything is properly sealed to minimize any roof leaks from developing. Also, we want to make sure the life of the roof is extended as much as possible. This is why a roof maintenance program is so important. We want to make sure that the roof is inspected at least once a year and that any repairs that are needed are done. Why, you ask? We want to minimize the inconvenience of roof leaks. How costly are they? They are very costly. Not only are we talking about roof repairs, there may be insulation that needs to be replaced, drywall, personal belongings, mold, and also the inconvenience to either the tenant or that homeowner. So we want to be proactive. So if you don't have a roof maintenance program in place, we strongly recommend that you contact us so we can have that roof inspected and have a yearly inspection done, and any repairs that are needed are done. So let's begin to talk about the different roof systems. So depending on the roof that you have, we look at different components to look at the life of the roof. Let's begin by discussing shingle roofs. These are asphalt shingle roofs that you see that have granules on. The shingle is made up of different layers, and the top layer is the granulated cap that you see. When the granules start coming off that cap and they become shiny, you know that they're losing their integrity, and it's a sign that that roof needs to be replaced. We also want to look at how many layers you have. Most cities allow up to 2 layers. So an option to install a second layer on a 1-layer system is possible and is cost effective as well. This is what a new shingle roof looks like. It's aesthetically pleasing, no more roof leaks, and best of all, it carries a full system warranty. So if your association's shingle roof is in need of replacement, give us a call today. The next system that's installed on slope roofs is tile. Now with a tile system, tiles can either come in concrete or clay, and even synthetic. The function of the tiles is to remove as much water off the roof as possible. But the true protection on a tile roof comes from the underlayment. This is what you see on the right-hand side pictures. On the top, you see a 30-pound underlayment. This is what's commonly used. At the bottom, you see a synthetic. For the re-roof at the bottom, we removed all the tiles that were there, replaced the damaged wood, and installed 2 layers of the synthetic material to provide that association with a 30-year labor and material warranty. So this is what a new tile roof looks like. New underlayment and new tiles. Now there's also the option of reusing existing tiles. So give us a call today and we can let you know if that's an option that you can consider as well. So let's discuss flat roof systems. First of all, what system do you have? These are the 4 most common systems out there. On the top left, you see a cap sheet system. On the top right, you see a gravel system. On the bottom left, you see a coated system. And on the bottom right, you see a single-ply system. Depending on what system you have and its current condition, we'll be able to provide you the available options. There are a couple of things that we look at. First of all, we want to see how many layers are currently installed. Most cities allow up to 2 layers. So we'll take a core sample and we'll determine how many layers you have. We'll also look at the current roof condition. Based on those 2 factors, we're able to determine what options you have available. Here are a few of the possible systems that you can have installed on a flat roof system. We can do a roof torch. You see in the pictures there how the system is installed. This is a great performing system. It's Title 24, energy efficient, and best of all, it's brand new. It comes with a full system warranty. So whether you have a torch or a built-up, it's going to be a granulated cap on top. These are really great systems to install. Again, we are certified with most major manufacturers, and we can make sure that we provide you the best warranties available. Coating is also another option available. We work with most major manufacturers out there, so we're able to provide the best available warranties, whether it's acrylic, silicone, or polyurethane. We can go over those options with you, depending on the current condition of the roof. This may be a cost-effective way of having a Title 24 energy-efficient cool roof system installed. There's also single-ply. Single-ply is a very popular system. The major pros about using single-ply is that it is very low maintenance, very durable, and it has the longest warranties available for flat roof systems. We work with the major manufacturers out there, and we're able to provide the best available warranties as well. So give us a call, and we can discuss with you if single-ply would be a good option for you. Foam roof systems can be problematic. We don't recommend or install foam roofs. We also provide free inspections and assessments. This is a good way for you to begin to see the current condition of the roof, how many layers you have, and also if any repairs are needed. If the roof system is in poor condition, we'll let you know, and we'll begin to discuss available options. But if it's still in a good serviceable condition, we can look at repairs that may be needed to make sure that that roof system's life expectancy lasts as much as possible. So to obtain a free inspection, let us know. Contact us and we'll send an inspector out there. We'll provide you a free inspection report. It'll include pictures and it'll include recommendations of any repairs that are needed at that point. This is what a report looks like. It'll give you pictures that were taken during the inspection, and it'll give you a list of items that may need correction. So after the inspection is done and the repairs are made, we provide you with completion pictures. And all the records of any service done on your roof is kept in our server, so that in case you need documentation to what repairs were done 5 years ago, we'll have those records. We'll have the record of the inspection. We'll have the record of the completion pictures. We also offer services with gutters, with decking, with waterproofing, roof pavers, and payment plans.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate your time. We look forward to hearing from you. So please contact us for any roofing and waterproofing needs. Remember, ADCO's here to help you. This is Dan, and have a wonderful day.
Hi, board. Okay, we're gathered here today to get a resolution to lien on yet another unit that is behind on their HOA fees. The parcel number for this unit is 0000005555000. Matt, can you, as a treasurer, tell us how much is due on this account?
$2,847, Helen.
Okay. All right. Is there a motion? Is there a motion at this time from any board member?
Well, can we discuss this first? I'd like to say that I am not in favor of moving forward with the lien. There's a global pandemic. Nobody's working. Nobody has money. I really don't think it's a good idea to put this unit to collections.
And I don't know if you've heard about the mail recently, but no one's getting it, so they probably just didn't get their statements.
And I really like them. They take care of my dog when I go on vacation. So I kind of feel it would be awkward when I see them walking down the hall. So I don't think I'm in agreement.
I'm in agreement to proceed because we need to pay our vendors and there's still bills to pay. And not only that, but just because they're nice doesn't mean we can't collect.
I'm going to have to agree with Jessica on that. We have fiduciary responsibility to collect the HOA fees and pay the vendors. I mean, what are we going to cut? Insurance? Want to cut insurance? Pools? We can't. I agree with Jessica there. Okay, is there a motion now?
I make a motion not to proceed with the lien. Nay.
I'm in agreement with Matt. That's a no for me.
And I'm with them. No.
Okay. All in favor?
Yay.
No. Okay, well, I guess then the vote is it doesn't pass. Okay.
Noted.
Big mistake.
Huge mistake.
Our next speaker is Susan Paquette, who is the Senior Trustee Sales Officer and the Operation Manager at Witkin and Neal. Susan has been with Witkin and Neal since its inception in 2006. Prior to that, she directed the lien preparation and pre-foreclosure services at California Association Lien Collections, LLC, a trustee firm specializing in non-judicial foreclosures on behalf of community associations. Ms. Paquette's energy, focus, and attention to detail has resulted in her achieving the highest level of certification available to foreclosure sales offices through the United Trustees Association. We have had the great honor of working with Witkin and Neal and Susan for a number of years. Susan, we'd love to hear from you on collections.
Hi, Neda. Thank you for that lovely introduction. My name is Susan Paquette, and I'm here today on behalf of Witkin and Neal. Witkin and Neal is working on our 15th year, assisting associations in collecting delinquent assessments through the process of non-judicial foreclosure. What is non-judicial foreclosure? Well, we're here to explain that today. But first, I would like to thank again HOA Organizers for this chance to meet with all of you today. It's been several years that we've been able to join HOA Organizers in their ABCs for HOAs, and we look forward to continuing our relationship for many more years. So, without further ado, let's talk about non-judicial foreclosure for homeowners associations. Right now, on the screen, you can see the general timeline for an HOA's foreclosure. Now, non-judicial foreclosure, as the name implies, is a process outside of the court that involves using recording documents against a property to foreclose. Creditors throughout California, banks and deed of trust holders, use this process almost exclusively to end debtors' possessions of properties. Now, homeowners associations are the only other creditor, other than a bank, that can use a non-judicial foreclosure process. So it's a quicker, less expensive, easier process for you to eliminate having a non-paying delinquent owner. The homeowners association's foreclosure process begins with an initial notice sent to the owner called a pre-lien or intent to lien notice. This notice must be sent to the owner at least 30 days prior to the lien recording and must include several statutory disclosures. Additionally, the notice must offer the owner internal dispute resolution or alternative dispute resolution. These offers essentially give the owner a chance to meet with the board to discuss his dispute, or to meet with the board and a third-party negotiator. Now, assuming that our homeowner doesn't resolve his delinquency or use a dispute resolution method during those 30 days, the next step will be to record a lien on his property. Again, that has to take place no less than 30 days from the notice, and it must be approved by the board in an open session meeting before it can take place. This vote cannot be delegated to any other party. The board has to make the decision themselves. Continuing our foreclosure process, the actual step that commences a foreclosure is the recording of a notice of default on the property. Now, before that action can take place, at least 30 days have to elapse since the lien is recorded, and another meeting by the board must take place. Your board has to meet in executive session to approve this action, making sure to reference the property only by its assessor's parcel number, not by the unit number or the homeowner's name. There's also a statutory minimum threshold that must be met. The assessments must be at least $1,800 or 12 months delinquent. Proceeding after the notice of default records, the statute requires a mandatory 3-month waiting period. During that time, no additional foreclosure action can take place. However, our office will use that time to contact the board to confirm if you want to continue proceeding with the next step in foreclosure. That action is the publication of a notice of trustee sale. And that is actually the foreclosure sale that you probably heard so much about. It's a public auction held in the county that the property is located in. It's open to the public, and the association has several options when they get to that stage. You can choose to sell the property to an outside bidder. You could simply postpone the sale while you negotiate with the homeowner. Or the association can take the choice of taking title to the property. Now, if the property is sold to an outside bidder, or even if the association takes title, the sale is subject to a 90-day right of redemption after foreclosure. This allows the former homeowner an additional 90 days to remit payments and regain title to his property. If the former owner does not redeem his property during the 90-day redemption period, then the association's foreclosure will be finalized with the recording of the trustee's deed upon sale. This document transfers title into the name of the successful bidder from the HOA's auction. So that's the entire foreclosure process for a homeowners association. However, before we leave you, we'd like to give you some final thoughts to consider. Only about 1% of our accounts go through this entire foreclosure process. Indeed, the vast majority of our accounts are resolved without the need for the association or another bidder to take title. Most of our files are resolved through payment plan monitorings, which we offer on behalf of homeowners associations, escrow demand preparation, surplus funds deliberation, and bankruptcy monitoring. Thank you for joining us today. If there are any questions about this presentation or any aspect of the non-judicial foreclosure process, please feel free to contact any of the staff members listed on this screen. My name is Susan Paquette. On behalf of Witkin and Neal, we hope you're having a wonderful day. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Regina Korossy. She is a certified financial advisor and accredited asset management specialist with Edward Jones Investments, one of the oldest investment firms on Wall Street. Regina has more than 25 years of experience as an executive, entrepreneur, and educator, and has spent 15 of those years in finance, where she works with individual investors on helping them achieve their financial goals. She particularly enjoys educating her clients about investing and has taught at the university level for more than a decade. She earned her Master's of Business Administration degree in 2006 from Pepperdine Graziato Business School. I had the great honor of meeting Regina at a leadership conference a few years ago, and since then we've become quite friendly with each other. We also learned that we're both moms to young twins. It's my great honor to introduce Regina Korossy and to hear from her on what 2021 will bring to us financially. Thanks, Regina, for being here.
Thank you, Neda. Hi, everyone. I'm Regina Korossy, and as a financial advisor and accredited asset management specialist, my goal is to help clients navigate the uncertainty and help them achieve their goals. And we have had no shortage of uncertainty this year. 2020 has been an unprecedented year, no doubt. And on top of the year's events, it also happened to include a US presidential election. Now, you've probably heard quite a bit of commentary and speculation about what impact the results of the election are going to have on our lives. Presidential elections are always a hot button for headlines and investment. However, this time we're also dealing with the unprecedented COVID-19 pandemic, the resulting recession, and the emerging, albeit slow, recovery. So like many Americans, you may wonder how the election's outcome could affect the financial markets, your personal portfolio, and the progress you're making towards your goals, as well as how it relates to your strategies as fiduciaries of your HOAs. You may also wonder whether you should change your investment strategy based on the election results. Now, although changes in government policies can have an effect on investment returns, they're actually much harder to predict than you might think. And the consequences of policy changes are usually not as expected. So let's start today by taking a step back for some perspective. Here's what the stock market has looked like over the last 90 years. Now, this chart represents every single war, every presidential election, every financial crisis, and every recession since 1929. And as you can see from the dark gray mountain, that the stock market has always recovered. In fact, markets have performed well amid a wide range of conditions and challenging periods. High interest rates, low interest rates, shifting global conditions, and changing political environments. Even during the 1930s, which was one of the worst decades for stocks, the stock market basically broke even. So you may ask, if the stock market has recovered 100% of the time, what causes the average investor to panic and sell? So this is where we look at the psychology of investing. And we have learned over the last 100 years that market sell-offs are fed by two things, fear and uncertainty, and our reflexive nature and reaction to that fear and uncertainty. Now, no matter who I'm working with, it could be HOA boards, business owners, individual investors, I often say that one of the most important services I provide my clients is really saving them from themselves. because money taps into the emotional part of our brain called the amygdala, which is what triggers our fight or flight response. Whereas we should be making decisions with a different part of our brain called the prefrontal cortex, where our rational and our deliberate thought comes from. And it's this fight or flight response that can cause us to make bad decisions during emotional times in our lives. It's the same emotional trigger that can cause those going through something traumatic, such as a divorce or the loss of a loved one, or say a global pandemic, to make cognitive and emotional errors, which may result in bad decisions. But the good news is this can be remedied with two things as well: awareness and education. So in March, the stock market dropped 34% in what has been the most abrupt and also the shortest bear market in history. And as an example, if we look back to the last time that the market dropped more than 30%, it would be back in 2009, when we saw market headlines such as these. Not unlike some of the headlines you may have seen since March. And these headlines are meant to evoke an emotional reaction and to grab your attention. That's the point. So in 2009, the investors who reacted emotionally and pulled their money out of the stock market missed out on the largest rebound in history. Similarly, the market dropped 34% in March and has since bounced back about 60%, resulting in the shortest bear market in history. And so this reminds us that although history may not always repeat itself, it certainly does rhyme. So even though we can't predict the future and we can't time the market, history can provide us with some helpful context. For example, you may be surprised to learn that historically, the stock market has returned about 14% during election years and under every political combination in Washington, providing an annual average return of 8% per year. In other words, the economy has grown regardless of who controlled the White House and Congress. This table also shows us that the stock market and the economy have performed better under Democratic presidents. They've also performed better when Democrats held the majority in Congress. However, inflation has been lower during Republican presidencies and congressional majorities, which directly affects the bond markets. Now, it might be tempting to think these differences will continue, but that could be dangerous to your nest egg to try to predict what's going to happen in the financial markets based on what's happened in Washington. A more powerful driver of market performance over time is the broader economic backdrop. So with that in mind, here are some key trends you should know and keep in mind when it comes to politics and investing. Remember how I said that emotions can drive some investors to make bad decisions? That means that these knee-jerk reactions to election outcomes are often misleading. But that does not prevent the media from piggybacking, magnifying, and speculating on those knee-jerk reactions with some alarming and eye-catching headlines. So for example, looking back at past election outcomes, stocks initially dipped about 5% after Obama's 2008 win and about 2% after his 2012 victory. Stocks also declined 4% in the early hours after Trump's victory in 2016. But all of these post-election dips proved to be short-lived, with stocks quickly reversing their course. In fact, since 1947, the S&P 500 has climbed 6% on average in the 12 months following a presidential election, which is about the same percentage as the 12 months preceding an election. So here's another view of the stock market, and this time with the two political parties overlaid in red and blue. When we look historically at an incumbent Republican Party being replaced by a Democratic Party in the Oval Office, the market averaged a return of 14% the following year, compared to 8.6% when an incumbent Republican stayed in office. In fact, you would not be able to name a single president under which the stock market has not increased. So the key takeaway here is that the stock market doesn't win or lose on or just post-election day. and has performed well following a wide variety of election outcomes. It's also important to remember that the stock market is not the economy, but rather a reflection of consumer confidence. And consumer confidence is often tied to partisan views. However, it's consumer spending that drives 2/3 of economic growth in our country. So when consumers feel confident, they're willing to spend more, and that spending boosts demand and economic growth. This chart shows that consumers tend to have more confidence about the economy when their preferred party is in office. Not surprising. Democrats expressed higher levels of confidence between 2008 and 2016 with President Obama, and Republicans have reported higher levels of confidence under President Trump. Independents tend to exhibit confidence at levels between the two political parties. So even though Trump and Biden have very different approaches when it comes to key policies such as taxes, regulation, and the government's role in economic growth, it's important to remember that this is not new or unique to this specific election, even though these differing views are more heightened given the existing pandemic and current political environment. Also, often what is said during the campaign trail differs from what actually becomes legislation. No administration solely determines the fate of the economy or the financial markets. While changes in tax policies can be unpredictable over time, today taxes are at historically low levels, and the government deficit has increased substantially as a result of the pandemic and our government's response to it. So that means it is not unreasonable to expect taxes to rise at some point in the near or distant future. And that just presents opportunities to discuss strategies with your financial advisor and tax professionals. So the key takeaway here is that even though investor sentiment differs, in each of these time periods on the chart, the stock market increased, growing above 14% during the first and second Obama terms, and about 12% under Trump. Now, as we recorded this presentation on November 17th, in the weeks following Biden's win, the stock market reached record-breaking highs. So, since consumer spending is the largest component of our GDP, and it relies heavily on consumer sentiment, now more than ever, it's the economic and corporate conditions that matter much more than politics. The trillions of dollars in monetary and fiscal stimuli in response to the pandemic was the most aggressive government response in our nation's history, and it occurred sooner than in any other recession ever. And it's this monetary and fiscal easement that served as a much-needed bridge for our economy and will continue to be a key component of the economy for some time in the future. The drop in economic activity this year was the largest quarterly drop in GDP since the Great Depression, shrinking by about 5% in the first quarter and 31.4% in the second quarter. So the economy started to come out of the slump slowly in the third quarter, due in large part to the federal relief efforts. Additionally, the unemployment rate, which spiked from 4.4% in February of this year to 14.7% in March as a result of the stay-at-home orders and countrywide shutdowns, has been decreasing steadily and was last reported at 6.9% in October. So the key takeaway here and depicted in this graph is that the success, growth, and resiliency of the US economy doesn't change with each election. So just like the fundamentals don't change when it comes to the economy, it's the fundamentals of investing, such as buying quality investments in a well-diversified portfolio, taking into account various sectors, various asset classes, and holding them for the long term. That's what stands up to short-term market uncertainty. It's also important to ensure you have an appropriate type and amount of fixed income investments, which really act as a cushion to equities. So by maintaining the right investment mix to your specific situation, it's going to be much easier to withstand short-term uncertainties and increase your chances for a positive return. And although it may be challenging to stay patient during periods of market volatility, once you have a strategy in place, doing nothing is actually doing something because you're sticking to your strategy. The most valuable asset we have is time, and time is also the most powerful driver of long-term returns. This table shows that a portfolio, which includes a combination of US and international stocks, as well as fixed income, had the highest chance of positive returns over all periods, 100% of the time. So while this election poses unique challenges, politics should not be viewed as a long-term driver of markets. The market doesn't win or lose on election day. Since World War II, the average annual return of the US stock market has been 11%, regardless of which party controls the White House and Congress. Neither administration solely determines the fate of the economy. Although White House policies differ, it's consumer spending and business investment that plays a more significant role in determining market success. The market doesn't have a political party. It's the fundamentals that matter much more than politics. Political changes occur frequently, and your investment timeline will likely span numerous presidential terms. So it's important to make decisions that are aligned with your financial goals rather than election headlines or political parties. So because of this, my advice is don't play politics with your portfolio. Please feel free to reach out to me with any specific questions you may have. I'm happy to discuss your personal financial situation.
Thank you for calling HOA Organizers. This is Neda speaking. How may I help you?
Hello, my name is Earl, and I just moved into Happy Place HOA. And let me tell you, there is nothing happy about what's going on over here.
Oh no, Earl. Well, first of all, let me start by saying welcome to the community. And I'm sorry to hear that you haven't had a good experience. What seems to be the issue?
Well, let's talk about this board member, Marcia, shall we? So, you know, she is just so rude. She always comes up and hoots and hollers at me and sneers, sneers. And she just says the nastiest things, and you have to do something about it. It's beyond reproach. It's crazy.
Wow. Well, I've never heard of such a thing with respect to Marcia, but we take harassment claims very seriously. Allow me to speak with her, and I'll get back to you shortly. Does that sound all right?
It sounds fine, but you better take care of it quickly. I'm not playing around.
All right, Earl. Well, hang tight, and we'll be right back with you.
All right. Bye.
Bye. Guess I have to call Marcia. What's that all about?
Hello?
Hi, Marcia. It's Neda with HOA Organizers. How are you?
Hey, Neda. I'm good. Thank you. How are you?
I'm doing well. So listen, I just wanted to talk to you really quickly. I'm sure there's a logical explanation because you're just such an amazing person, but
thank you.
So I just got a call from a new homeowner. His name is Earl. And
Earl.
Whoa. I mean, he says that you've been harassing him, which is a big deal. What's that all about?
There's no surprise there. I mean, let me just tell you something. Growing up, I've always hated the name Earl. And Cindy too, actually. It's just, I have a bad feeling about this guy. I think he's the devil. It's like something can't be right because his name is Earl.
I mean,
wouldn't you agree?
Marcia, you can't harass people, and I mean, he seems to be such a lovely person.
But it's Earl.
Maybe this isn't a good time to tell you that his wife's name is Cindy? Last but certainly not least in our breakout group today, I'd like to introduce Stephen Roseman. Stephen Roseman is the founder and managing partner in the law firm of Roseman Law, APC, which has offices in Southern California. Mr. Roseman also has significant experience in representing common interest developments in the creation and amendment of governing documents, contract negotiations, litigation, construction defect, land subsidence litigation, and bad faith litigation. Over the past 22 years, Mr. Roseman has represented hundreds of condominium and homeowners associations in dealing with both their transaction needs and litigation-related issues. Mr. Roseman lectures extensively to trade and industry groups on issues related to real estate matters, condominium and homeowners associations, and construction defect litigation. He has authored various articles and was a contributing author to the 2006, 2007, and 2008 cumulative supplements to the third edition of the book, Handling Construction Defect Claims, Western States. Mr. Roseman was awarded the Speaker of the Year award by the CAI Channel Islands chapter and nominated as Speaker of the Year by the CAI Orange County chapter. Past nominations and recognition includes 2012 nominated for Speaker of the Year by CAI Orange County, and in 2009 as Speaker of the Year by the CAI Channel Islands chapter. I'd also like to add that he was Speaker of the Year for the Los Angeles chapter of CAI for 2018 with a program that I worked very closely with him in presenting. I'm so excited to hear from Steve, and I know that you all will have some wonderful information to take away today. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you so much for the introduction. My name is Steve Roseman, Managing Partner of Roseman Law, and today I'll be bringing you a seminar on the subject dealing with bullying and harassment within your communities. This issue is becoming more and more of a significant problem in many of our communities, and we're going to go through the type of bullying from various aspects of it, who is exposed to and experiencing bullying, and then mechanisms, both legal and alternatives, in addressing this issue within your communities. So first of all, what is defined as bullying? Bullying is an attempt to harm, intimidate, coerce, oppress, torment, force, or compel, strong arm, or pressure someone perceived as vulnerable. It's a very broad topic, and we all know what bullying is in a school environment, but this environment is as effective. And we're going to run through some of the alternatives and dynamics that exist with regard to that. So first of all, where does bullying occur within common interest developments? We often see it occurs from one board member to potentially a property manager or a fellow board member. Sometimes you see it with a homeowner who's bullying or picking on or harassing a board member or the property manager. Sometimes it's a board member to that homeowner, or a board member and a homeowner to a third-party vendor, or just between two homeowners that this issue occurs. So briefly, I'm going to describe the 4 types of bullying that exist. So first of all, it's that verbal bullying, that harassment, that bullying where someone says mean, cruel words, yelling, screaming, disrespectful comments, etc. That's the type of bullying we know, whether it's done in a phone call, whether it's done in in-person meeting. So that bullying is what we call verbal bullying. The next type of bullying is relational bullying. In that situation, it's a tactic whereby people are excluded. So the exclusionary tactics where you're deliberately preventing someone from being part of a group. An example of that is where there's discussions of board business without including them, leaving them out of certain email chains, and excluding them from being part of the board when it comes to decision-making of the board. The next type is the actual physical bullying, that physical intimidation, whether it's just shoving or pushing or kicking or tripping. Those are examples of that, or even slamming your fist on a table, being pushed in the hallway. That's a physical type of bullying that occurs. The last type, which is more common, that we see very often, is what's known as cyberbullying, where those harassing emails are sent. Rumors or lies are spread via email or text or some other form of social media. And that cyberbullying is another form of bullying that is actionable and can be prevented. So the important question is, how do we deal with bullying? I'm going to deal with various scenarios. Let's deal with the first situation, as I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, where it occurs from one board member to another board member, or from one board member potentially to a manager, who the common interest development manager who's overseeing or attending the board meeting. So what actionable items or availability does a board have in dealing with a board member who's bullying or harassing? The first method is a censure. And what a censure effectively is either in the form of a letter or in the form of a hearing where you call that board member to a meeting or sending a letter advising them that their action is a breach of their fiduciary duty. And there are various forms of breach of fiduciary duty, whether it's a breach of confidentiality, whether it's a violation of other governing documents. And that censure letter would be effectively putting them on notice about their violation and why they need to cease and desist in what they're doing in their actions towards other board members or management. And that's known as a censure. Now, as far as censure is concerned, it's a formal reprimand of that director. Now, as I've said, giving you some examples, if there's a disruption of meetings, shouting or profanity, if it's a breach of confidences and confidentiality, interference with association operations, and other forms of breach of fiduciary duties, that is why you would then proceed with a censure. In matters where a censure may be a proper forum, what you may do is do a noticed hearing and call that individual director to that hearing. Minutes will be recorded to document that meeting. It can be done either in executive session or it can actually be done in an open forum. If there are going to be privileged communication discussed, it's probably better to do it in an executive session. Otherwise, you can do that in a forum where it's open to the rest of the owners in the community. Once that is done and it's documented in the minutes, you will be aware that this person has been censured and what those actions are, and those owners, if it's in a regular meeting, will have access to those minutes. You cannot remove a board member as a board member without a vote of the members. So you may remove them as an officer, but not as a director. So now we know that censure may or may not work because they're still actively involved on the board. What's the next available options? Well, if there is some form of threat or there's a possibility of great or irreparable injury that will result from an action of that board member to another board member or management, you can proceed with a civil harassment restraining order or a temporary restraining order. Now, you would have to show evidence of imminent threat or potential threat of, and harm. So although this is a good tool to stop behavior and even get a restraining order to stop them from coming within a distance or emailing or making phone calls, you have to show an imminent threat. Why that's important is because the standard in evidence is much higher than in a normal situation where you'd get a restraining order or preliminary injunction, which we'll speak about in a few minutes. So in this scenario, you want to make sure that you document immediately if this behavior rises to this level. Second, if necessary, and I strongly advise, report it to local law enforcement, make a police statement about the threats so that there is the evidence to support this type of restraining order. We will talk in a few minutes about the injunction, but at this stage, those are two avenues. And in addition to that, some of these tools can be used as well against another board member. But I'm now going to go on to situations where an owner is harassing a board member or a manager or some third-party vendor, or even another board member is taking action against or harassing any of the following as mentioned above. So let's talk about a few of the options. So let's assume there is a homeowner in the community that disrupts board meetings. This homeowner yells and screams at the property manager. This individual goes out to the vendors who are working in the landscaping and instructs them to do different things that then they've already been given instructions on by the board members. And you need to stop this type of behavior in order for our vendors to be able to do their work, or the manager to do their work, or even the board members to be able to effectively operate. The first thing is calling them to a notice and hearing. That's posting a notice and calling them to this hearing. Make sure your rules have some form of code of conduct that you can call them to a hearing based on those rules. You will then explain to them what their violations are and advise them that if they don't cease, you can either impose a fine or some other restrictions as set forth in your governing documents. You may also advise them that they need to cease and desist this activity, otherwise it will escalate to the next level in dealing with this issue. So the first one, notice and hearing, and you can bring them to notice and hearing. Sometimes prior to doing that, you may just want to have a cease and desist letter, which will stop their activity, but often doesn't work. An IDR, internal dispute resolution. The Civil Code allows for a homeowners association board, or an owner for that matter, under Civil Code 5905, to call that individual to a hearing with one of or two board members in attendance, or manager for that matter, to discuss this issue in an attempt to amicably resolve this issue. Doing it in an IDR format has some value in the sense that they will informally discuss this issue and try and resolve it. Bear in mind that anything discussed at an IDR, internal dispute resolution, has no privilege, as with a mediation, which we'll talk in a minute about. So therefore, anything that's said in that meeting can and will be used against a board member. So be cautious in what is discussed, keep it very factual, always have two people in attendance with that individual to be able to address these issues. If you do request IDR, that individual owner doesn't have to accept. If an owner requests IDR from the board is obligated to comply with that request. Temporary restraining order. We've spoken about the temporary restraining order. The one civil harassment restraining order is done through the courts, which allow law enforcement to be able to act on that. That's the imminent threat. The other type of TRO is a situation where it's done pursuant to the CC&Rs, and your governing documents have a provision relating to harassment or nuisance, as the general term is. And you can get that restraining order, TRO, temporary restraining order, on short notice, 24 hours, but you have to show why this cannot be done on a normal notice motion, which we'll talk in a minute about. So assuming you're not proceeding with the TRO, the IDR hasn't worked out, notice and hearing, imposing a fine, another suspension hasn't worked, what actions do we have available under the governing documents? The next action is known as an injunction. If an individual is creating a nuisance, as defined by the governing documents, it's a very broad definition, you are able to bring an action and file a lawsuit and ask the court to issue an order holding that person or instructing that person not to perform whatever acts they are doing. So if they're harassing, disrupting board meetings, if they are sending harassing emails, if they're constantly calling and creating a nuisance that way, you can get an order from the court ordering them to cease that type of action. Prior to filing an injunction and a lawsuit, you have to go to alternative dispute resolution. So you put that owner on notice, sending that owner a letter advising them that we're intending to bring an injunction to stop your action, but we're giving you an opportunity to mediate this dispute. You have 30 days to accept this mediation. The fee will be shared equally, and we normally go before a judge or some other mediator to try and resolve this. If we go into that mediation and resolve it, great. Anything discussed in that mediation is privileged communication. If it doesn't resolve in that mediation forum, or that particular owner doesn't accept the mediation within 30 days, then you're able to proceed with a lawsuit. Why do you have to go to ADR before the lawsuit? It's mandated in the Civil Code, and in order to ensure that the association recovers your attorney's fees, you want to make sure you follow the ADR procedure prior as a precursor to filing the injunction. So it doesn't resolve itself in ADR. Now we proceed with an injunction. We get the court, we file the lawsuit, we file the complaint. Simultaneously with that, we file what's known as a motion for preliminary injunction. Attached to that document are declarations setting out exactly what the action is, or the actions of that individual owner, for purposes of supporting the injunction or the order of the court instructing that person to cease whatever activity that person is doing. So you then file the motion, file the lawsuit, serve it on the person, and at minimum of 21 days, you schedule a hearing for that. That person would have to appear in court, either on their own or with an attorney, file an opposition to this injunction. If the court grants our injunction and instructs that owner or person to cease whatever it is that they're doing, we now have a court order in place that instructs that person to cease. You will then still continue to trial in a year's time to make that preliminary injunction a permanent injunction. But with a preliminary injunction, it's an extremely enforceable document. What happens if the owner or individual doesn't follow the injunction granted by the court? The next avenue available to the association would be to bring an action for contempt. And a contempt action is where you say to the court, Your Honor, you granted this injunction instructing this individual to cease whatever the activity was that was set forth in the injunction. That person is violating your court order. Therefore, you can hold them in contempt, and with that comes potentially up to 5 days in prison and a monetary fine or a monetary fine to be able to ensure that that person complies with that. And I can tell you from experience, we've had situations where we've had injunctions granted, they violated the court order, and as a result of that, the court has issued a bench warrant on a contempt hearing to have them picked up by local law enforcement for violating a court order of the court. So now that we've gone through the various tools that are available to a board to be able to address harassment and bullying by whether it's another board member or by some owner in the community, I hope this gives you some tools. We're always available to discuss these issues, but it's important to make sure you take action, whether it's just simple action or some type of legal action to address these issues, to allow a community to exist and function in a harmonious and an environment that allows for the community to coexist well together. Thank you very much.
Hello, and thank you for allowing me to introduce Tinley Law Group. We're an HOA law firm that's been representing homeowners associations for over 30 years. We love working with our client family over 1,000 communities in a wide variety of practice areas, including assessment collection. In fact, in 2013, we developed Altera Assessment Recovery, which is quickly becoming an industry leader in the area. Our Find HOA Law web library is also another example of our modern approach to adding value to our clients. We hope to have the opportunity to work with you and to develop a relationship with you and your community.
Alliance Association Bank brings you powerful banking solutions for the unique needs of the community association industry. From robust lockbox and electronic payment options to lending solutions and innovative technology, everything we offer is designed to help community management companies succeed. With Alliance Association Bank, you can expect us to be as dedicated to your success as you are. To speak to one of our expert bankers, visit allianceassociationbank.com.
Adam Sterling is California's premier law firm exclusively representing common interest developments. We provide general counsel and litigation services to a diverse portfolio of clients, including both homeowner and commercial associations. For the past 10 years, Adam Sterling has advised boards of directors in the effective governance of associations and advised on the implementation of strategic plans that reduce their liability risks. Adam Sterling is well known for its weekly newsletter and award-winning website, davissterling.com. The website and the newsletter reflect the firm's commitment to education and is the #1 relied upon reference for the interpretation of the Davis-Sterling Act.
Since 1987, Swedelson Gottlieb has been helping community associations like yours navigate new legislation, such as exterior elevated elements in elections, rental restrictions, ADUs and JDUs, and with the operations through COVID-19, providing guidance to your community associations. Anything that your association needs, our legal team is here to help.
Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoyed today's presentation. And now we have some questions and answers from our panel. I'm going to start with Dr. Lori Baker-Shenna. Lori, you talk about inspiring a shared vision. What do you do if you have indifferent or even contentious fellow board members?
Well, you know, it's interesting because that happens on boards. Obviously, we're not all sunshine and rainbows. However, that's why we want to, share an inspired vision, because to come together and to share a vision together really helps bring people together. So what I would suggest is use your time to say, look, we need to know where our community and our board is going. Let's say in 2021. I want everyone to let us know, everyone give me an idea of what they believe is the purpose of our board, of our association, and where do you want to go? And even the crankiest person, when you ask them individually their ideas and engage them in their opinion, you'll be surprised how even cranky people will give you some feedback. Because if they're going to say to you, I have no vision and I have no idea and I don't care, then that really shows up as something that a peer group wouldn't be appreciative of. So that whole idea of bringing together as a team and saying, we're going to together create a vision and we need your input, that value they feel really does mitigate the crankiness that you might see in one of your board members.
That's
such wonderful. I'd add one point to that, and it's very interesting what Laurie says, because truthfully, even when I've had the pleasure of serving on boards, I think the quiet people who are board members often have the most Solomonic wisdom to share on the boards, but because they may be intimidated or impacted by people that are more vocal, I've always found one of the most effective ways for a president on a board to work is to go around the board to each board member and say, what's your opinion, what's your opinion, what's your opinion? So each person gets a chance to actually articulate their thoughts without being intimidated, and by being called on, they may be able to share their thoughts without just sitting quietly by and allowing everybody else to dominate.
Absolutely. That is such a great strategy, especially on Zoom meetings. But to tell everybody, I'm going to be calling on you. So in the next meeting, maybe send around an email. I'm going to be calling on you about creating a shared vision. So please be prepared to contribute, because everyone is going to have a say. And when you do that, you involve people, even those who don't really want to be involved, but you do that, and that starts people going, even the shy ones. That's a great point.
That's really excellent to hear both of your thoughts on that. It's so important to bring people together, and especially when you're working together as a board. Thank you both for your feedback. And actually that brings us to a wonderful segue for a question for Steve Roseman. Steve, if a board member disagrees with the decision the board makes, are they able to speak out against it?
This is a question that comes up so often on boards where there's a dissenting vote or opinion of a board member, and the board majority makes a decision, and then that board member goes out and undermines the decision of the board, causing significant conflict and other related allegations. I think we have to differentiate between two different types of board meetings initially. One, executive session board meetings, where anything that's discussed is confidential, and an open meeting. So with regard to the executive session, the first and foremost important principle is board should speak with one voice. When a majority makes a decision, you are bound by that decision. Within an executive session forum, it's important to retain confidentiality, because if a board makes a decision, even if the board member feels that they didn't agree with the decision, they need to honor the majority decision and stick by it. And they cannot go out and disparage the board members or tell everyone out there that they disagreed with the decision and create conflict in the community as a result. Now, if they are adamant about a particular situation, they may document it in an email and make it part of the file, even though it may not find its way into the executive session minutes, but there's an obligation to remain confidential. If we're now in an open meeting where there's an open dialogue and everybody hears the opinions, they can go ahead and state why they oppose to that opinion, but they still have a legal obligation as well as a responsibility and a fiduciary obligation to go with the majority decision. If they have disagreements, that's the free right of everyone to have that debate. But once a decision is made, they have to stick with that decision. And I think that's a very, very important lesson to learn by board members, because truthfully, I always say that in HOAs, it's the best form of democracy out there when it comes to decision-making power. So I hope that answers the question.
It certainly does. And thanks for that distinction. A lot of times board members do have questions between the open session and executive session. Thank
And by the
you.
way, can I just add one other point to that, Neda? You know, sometimes you'll see dissenting voices who vote no on a decision, adamant that they document in the minutes why they voted no, or I want my name to appear in the minutes saying I voted no. There is no legal obligation on the part of the majority of the board to reference how particular board members voted. If the majority of the board in the minutes decide they just want to document approved or how they want to reflect it, that's up to the majority of the board when those minutes are approved. And that's why I've said if they have a disagreement, they can always document it in the form of an email or something else that may not necessarily be part of the minutes, but at least reflect their reasoning.
And thank you for that, Steve. I think property managers and recording secretaries across California are going to appreciate that feedback, because I know we're always asked to, or rather demanded, to include something or extract something from the minutes to that effect. So that's also really helpful. Thank you, Steve. Our next question is for Cyrus with Swedelson Gottlieb, and this is regarding AB 3182. How is a fee related to rentals, either one time or monthly, judged to be reasonable or not?
Okay, well, thanks for having me. So this is a controversial topic, and I think a lot of attorneys have different opinions on this. Generally speaking, under the Davis-Sterling Act and in California, associations were nonprofit corporations, and associations can't just be charging fees, charging for expenses that the association isn't actually incurring to some extent. And there's case law in California that basically speaks to that if you're going to charge a fee because of the costs or the what happens to the association as a result of all the rentals, short-term or otherwise, well, it needs to be reasonably tied to what actually exists in the community. So, if the association is thinking about imposing some kind of rental fee or some kind of fee relating to the fact that, hey, renters are going to be more prevalent in our community in light of AB 3182, it needs to be reasonably tied to actual costs. So what are move-in and move-out costs? Costs associated with reprogramming, your access control, your gate, your door, et cetera. So things that are actually impacting the community, I think it would be judged as reasonable to impose charges associated with that. However, it's very dependent on what your legal counsel says. Some things may or may not be reasonable from one firm to another. So as far as charging monthly versus one time specifically, I think that's a little more nuanced of a question. I think if there's some kind of annual charge, or again, some kind of charge that's tied to the actual costs being incurred, generally speaking, by the association, I think it would be reasonable. And whether that's one time or monthly, I think that just depends on the situation.
Thank you, Cyrus. I know this is a topic that is so new for everybody, and we have tons of questions coming in. I myself have a lot of questions about it, and I'm sure we're going to get different opinions as time progresses. So thank you for your opinion and feedback on that. The next question that I have is for Regina with Edward Jones. Should saving and investing money be a top priority at this time, or should people be focusing on paying down debt?
Thanks, Neda. I get asked this question actually quite a bit, and the short answer is it depends. It really depends on each specific situation. When I'm working with my clients to build out a plan for whatever they want their money to achieve, whether it's saving to pay for college or buying real estate or saving for retirement, we consider a lot of different factors. We look at money coming in, we look at money going out, and of course we look at and consider debt as well as many other variables. The interest rate that someone is actually paying on that specific debt is a very important factor. However, if you hold off investing until you are debt-free, then you will most likely miss out on years of growth and compounding, which are extremely important in helping your money grow at the rate you needed to achieve your goals. So therefore, the answer will really vary on each specific situation.
Can I add just one legal point to that, which a lot of people don't realize? That when people invest in SEP IRAs or some form of retirement account, let's assume they get a salary and they want to contribute either their company through the 401 or through a SEP IRA account, that's a judgment-proof investment, because SEP IRAs on a bankruptcy are untouchable, and I'm subject to obviously speaking to a bankruptcy attorney, but I'm pretty certain is untouchable as far as creditors attaching those SEP IRAs. So the reason I raise that is people who don't realize that they can invest in some form of retirement accounts should speak to an attorney or speak to their financial advisor to determine whether or not investing pre-tax dollars and having the protections that may exist there be a very worthy way of putting money aside for those later years, or even, God forbid, on a rainy day, even there'll be penalties associated with it. But it's something to consider from an investment perspective, even as you say, just small contributions every month to that, because the S&P and NASDAQ and Dow keep going one way, even though it's like this.
Absolutely. I think there's so much uncertainty surrounding finances these days. So Regina, thank you for your sound advice and feedback, and Steve also for yours to add to that. Our next question is for Antis. If a community is experiencing issues with a certain kind of roofing material, would it make sense to change the material? Example, from tile to asphalt shingles. And after you answer that, I'd like to follow up and ask our attorneys on the panel, would there be a problem in changing the roofing material when it pertained to using reserve funds to do that? So we'll give it to the Antis first.
Okay, thank you. So roofing material, it will depend on what the city is going to allow. So the city building department is going to calculate that with some engineering specs that are going to give us a amount of weight per square foot that is allowed on top of the structure. And if we exceed that weight, or if it exceeds that weight, we wouldn't be able to do that. In regards to changing from tile to shingle or shingle to tile, the main thing to probably consider is the flashing around all of that. If you have a roof that meets a wall from a lower floor roof into an upper floor wall, the flashing that is associated with that wall is at a height that is going to, it's going to flash over that roofing type. And so tile might be 2.5 inches tall, where shingle is 1/2 inch tall. And so we have a gap that we have to deal with there. And so sometimes that can mean having to basically demolition that portion of the wall to install new flashing at the right height and put stucco or siding back in place. But it starts with an engineering spec and the city building department to see if they would let us do that. And if this is a product that is no longer manufactured, then absolutely, we're doing what we can to, typically we're doing what we can to just match what is there, but go with something that's more current and is going to be, you know, available later.
And thank you. And then from a legal perspective, what do you all think about changing the material or type of roofing, or kind of any common area for that matter? Is that something that the board and association can do?
I'll jump in here. I think it is appropriate and reasonable to do so. I think this begs the question of whether this invokes, quote unquote, a capital improvement, whether you would view this as an entirely new component in the association for which you need to reserve versus an already existing component that you're simply modifying or replacing. So I think that's really where the question lies. I would tend to view this as not a capital improvement, most likely, that it's just you have reserves that cover the roof and the roof expenses, and this is just a change in the nature of the materials. However, it's really just roof repair and or roof replacement. Whereas a capital improvement, it's not a term that's legally defined actually for us, but most people regard a capital improvement as an entirely new improvement or a complete repurposing of a component. So if you don't have some kind of component like a gym and then you just add a gym out of nowhere, that would probably be viewed as a capital improvement. But this is really just a modification or replacement of the roof. I think different firms could have different opinions on that, but I think you have reserves for a reason. They provide a landscape for everything that you want to include and from a funding standpoint. And if your roof is already there, a change in materials likely would not be viewed as a capital improvement. Of course, you could have some governing documents that define capital improvements more specifically, but that would depend on a case-by-case basis for each association.
You know, I love Cyrus. There's always preconditioned on different lawyers having different opinions, but there's two of us, so there should be at least 3 opinions between us all. But I completely agree with Cyrus. I think you've got to do an analysis on a case-by-case basis. But as technology develops, for example, changing the type of roofing material because it's required because of life safety related issues on fire department requirements, or the longevity of the new replacement extends the life of the roof by another 10 years. And I think you've got to look at each capital improvement within a community. For example, upgrading of security systems at a front gate. Some people say that's a massive capital improvement because we didn't have it. So the analysis, as Sarah said, look at the governing documents, but also speak to your attorney and say, would this be defined as a capital improvement? And if it doesn't, could you give us an opinion to at least make sure we've documented the file why we haven't defined an upgrade or other work that's been done in a community as a capital improvement? And that's how you protect yourself under the business judgment rule or the judicial deference rule, by having an attorney render a written legal opinion to support why it's not within the parameters of a capital improvement.
Yeah, and I'd like to add one more thing. The reason why this matters, whether it's a capital improvement, is because many governing documents contain provisions that require membership votes for certain capital improvements. So I think it would probably should have prefaced my comments by saying that, first of all. So it's important to know what your governing documents say, because some documents don't have capital improvement provisions. So you actually might have more free reign in some associations where there is no such language, whereas in other associations you do have very detailed capital improvement language, which necessitates a membership vote if a capital improvement will be made, and if it reaches a certain level or exceeds a certain percentage of the association's expenses. So important that might be one of the first threshold questions we even ask.
Thank you. That was really, really well stated and very informative. Thank you to all 3 of you for answering that question. Our next question goes back to Lori. And again, I will also ask for our legal opinion to chime in as follow-up to the question for Lori. So Lori, is it okay for boards to own up to errors in judgment or mistakes to the membership at large, or does that diminish their trust in our leadership?
You know, I really believe that we do so much mistake shaming in our society. Everyone is afraid to make mistakes because, the shaming culture is just so prevalent. But at the end of the day, mistakes are human, and only through mistakes do we really learn how to do things. And I always believe that Americans in general don't like to be lied to, and they would rather hear an apology than a cover-up, if that makes any sense. So coming from that angle of really just humanity, I think that if delivered in a certain way with, what we made a mistake and we understand that we made a mistake and this is what we're doing and we learn from the mistake, I think that's really a way to build trust with your members and your homeowners. It's really the way you deliver that. I mean, if you're real defensive and not apologetic, that's one thing. But if you're apologetic and you own up to the mistake, I think I'm hoping in my heart that people understand that. But I find that in general, that is much more well accepted than just lying about the fact you're covering things up.
And from a legal counsel perspective, mistakes can be costly when they affect the association. So how would you, I know this is kind of a vague question, but what would you suggest in terms of mistakes? Should board members own up to them? How do you navigate them?
Well, I can tell you, I wish everything boiled down to what was the right thing to do. And I do believe what is the right thing to do must be done. But I can tell you from a legal perspective, you have to be very cautious. And I'll tell you why. You have to speak with counsel before there is any open acknowledgement of an admission of a negligent act, or even worse, an intentional act by a particular board member, for a number of reasons. One, that can be used against you and will be used against you in any lawsuit. Two, the question of coverage is impacted by statements made by board members. My advice, and this is purely a legal advice, thank you for bringing this to our attention. We will consult with an attorney and get legal guidance on that front. Then the attorney can give you a legal opinion, evaluate it, advise how best to disclose to the membership what the reason is. And I understand when I'm speaking from this position, I agree with you. I think many of our leadership, and I'm talking from a national level down, over the last 50 years would just fess up and said, I'm sorry, I did wrong. The American public is very forgiving, but you have to weigh that up against the legal implications and the risks associated with liability to the board of directors, as well as coverage and insurance related issues which play a part. So my simple advice is there's nothing wrong with what Lori says, and I agree with her, but I think speak to counsel first or an attorney just to make sure legally you're in a good position, and then decide how to disclose it, but don't hide things from homeowners. They will come out at the end of the day.
I co-sign what Steve just said, but I'll add from a practical level, I see all the time situations where a board might endeavor to remodel maybe a lobby or do something that everybody hates and everybody's against it. And, sometimes you have situations where we're not talking about intentional misdeeds or negligence even, just things that the board has done and it turned out to be the wrong decision. Maybe the problem kind of reared its head again later, whether it's a maintenance issue or like I said, a remodel issue. People just didn't like it from an aesthetic standpoint. And you can make mistakes like that. And as long as as Steve referred to the business judgment rule earlier, as long as you're making informed decisions as a board, listening to experts, taking action, or maybe taking a maintenance position in light of what the experts tell you, and you make a reasonable decision that's well informed, you are complying with the business judgment rule. So, you would be acting reasonably. And if you have to say to people, again, I'd say after maybe a conversation with legal counsel, but if you have to say to people, hey, everybody, we know that everybody didn't necessarily like the decision we made, and we acknowledge that, but here's what we're doing to fix it or to address it, or here's what we're going to do in the decision-making process when it comes to something aesthetic in the future, because we know people have different taste. I think that's completely reasonable, but I think always remember that the business judgment rule matters, and as long as you're making informed decisions based on expert advice, from a legal standpoint, you should be protected.
And Thank you, everyone. It sounds, go ahead, Lori.
I want to add that this is the beauty of having legal advice right here instantaneously, because it really provides insight. And it also goes to show our board members that getting advice from experts, and so you get the full 360 degrees on an issue, is so valuable. And I just learned something right now, some extra things that I now can consider. And so to bring in experts and to do that, I think is just a wonderful thing. It doesn't show weakness, it shows strength. And so I think we all need to remember that as well.
Indeed. And
sorry, I'll just add one more thing. I think there's always this sense, or you get this sense at a lot of associations, that it's the board versus everybody else. The board even physically sits somewhere that's separated from other people. And I think the more, subject to the legal side of it being okay, I think the more that there can be, even when it is a board decision in a certain circumstance, the more that the board can kind of convey and articulate its issues and or its faults, to the extent a bone can be thrown to the membership. I think that's important. I think it kind of whittles away this divide between the board and the association's members.
It sounds like we need to handle it more on a case-by-case basis. But Cyrus, you brought up a really interesting point regarding aesthetics. And I will say from a manager's perspective, that seems to be the hottest button that wakens up homeowners with lots of opinions when something aesthetically changes in the community. And I love the advice that you offered, which is to acknowledge maybe perhaps setting in motion a new plan or engaging homeowners to acknowledge their feelings in that instance where maybe it's not wrongdoing, but it's just perhaps we didn't go about it the correct way. We didn't engage our homeowners to consult about an aesthetic issue, and here's what we're going to do in the future. And I've often experienced board members who really, rather than kind of acknowledging that mistake, will hold their ground and their decisions and create more separation with the homeowners. And so I think that's really important advice, which is to, again, open it up and let homeowners know that their opinions matter. So our next question is for Steve.
I'm sorry, can I just add one point to this?
Sure.
Just to do full circle. You know, I must tell you, there's a number of communities that we've had where they've put it out to a discussion of the owners and a vote, and I'll explain what I mean by that. So one of our communities decided they were going to repaint the entire exterior common area, and it had that old-fashioned pinkish type look to the structure. And they put it out to the vote of the owners. And what they did was they said, here's 3 different colors. Write your name at the bottom of which one you like. But we did put a disclaimer language at the bottom to say, please understand, we are considering your opinion, but understand that we cannot delegate the decision-making power from the board. So this is not a vote of the owners on the color. The board makes the final decision, but we take into account your thoughts. And always remember, you can't please all the people all the time. It's just not possible. So we're going to listen to what you all have to say, but at the same time, you've entrusted us as a board to make a decision, and we're going to base it on that. And I think that plays into the very point that you're making, that mistakes are made, but even if it's not necessarily a mistake or it's a color not everybody likes, it doesn't mean it's not okay from a legal perspective for the board to make that decision.
Yes, thank you, Steve. That was a really wonderful point that you added there. So the next question is actually for you, Steve. How do you balance being a good neighbor with being a good board member? We don't want to create a sense of hostility with our neighbors, but certainly board members have an obligation to enforce the governing documents and sometimes aren't as popular.
I must tell you, this issue has become even more important and even more difficult during COVID. And I can tell you why. We have a situation in one of our communities where the gentleman across the road is now not only growing marijuana, but is also now producing or manufacturing in his garage. And the board president is very concerned because she has a real worry that if this issue is brought to their attention, that he may somehow come after her family, or she has a very serious concern. Here's the fundamentally important point. A board member is a representative who acts on behalf of the corporation. So, for example, if a board member is walking in the street and an owner approaches them and says to them, I want to discuss something with you, the standard answer there is, I understand what you're saying. I'm just one. I may be the board president, but I'm just one out of 5 or 7, however many board members there are. Please put it in writing or come to the board meeting and address that issue. I cannot speak on behalf of the corporation because I'm only one person. So I can tell you, avoid communication about HOA matters with owners if you can, as a step, and explain to them you're not doing this just to be difficult. You're doing this because you don't want to create conflict, and also you're one of 5 votes, and that's why it's important. The second important issue, and this is more a management issue that ties in, if there's a violation of the governing documents, that you can get independent, objective verification of the issue. So, for example, if there's a violation of a landscaping issue, or somebody's parking overnight of a vehicle, or there's other violations, it is better to get a photograph or some documentation that can be presented without saying, this is the person on the board who presented that information. Because although in California, in the criminal justice system, you have a right to confront your accuser, there's a misconception that whoever reported somebody is the one that has to be cross-examined by that person that is called to a notice and hearing. So if you can get independent, objective verification of a violation without having to bring a board member into this process, I would strongly recommend you do that because it takes away that conflict as a board member. I like management to deal with those issues, and obviously management gets into trouble very often, but the position is simply, we got no skin in the game. We're here to just enforce the governing documents. Obviously, down the line, if you bring in an injunction or some type of court action, you will need declarations signed, whether it's by the board members or someone else. My belief in that scenario, the more declarations, the better if more than one person has witnessed it, so that you sort of spread the fire across a group of people so that they don't just target one person who's coming after them. Get independent verification of whatever the issue is. I hope that does answer the question, but the important thing is board members need to understand that they don't always have to be the bad guys. Deflect it to management, deflect it to law, to legal, to write letters if they're worried about it, to not vilify these board members. And as Cyrus said, and this is so crucial, it's not us versus them as board members. We are here in a voluntary capacity to represent the community. We do this until you choose to vote somebody else. And as I always joke about, I say to the board members, tell that particular homeowner that you will double your salary if you continue with their attacks, because I'm going to go from 0 to 0 in what I'm doing. So it's important to understand it's not an us versus them. We're enforcing it. Change the governing documents if you don't like what we're doing.
Yeah, and I would add just real quick to Steve's first point, which is really important. We know that a lot of these communities are small, they're personal, you're in close quarters to people, you're going to come across people. Hopefully, especially once COVID is over, we all hope at some point. But if somebody asks you a question, I think there's kind of a famous case about an architectural decision, and hey, to a board member, an owner saying, hey, do you like my door? Do you like my pink door? And the board member basically says, yeah, I love it. And then it becomes a legal fight because it's, hey, did the association technically approve of that? Or did they know about that and not do anything? So, to Steve's first point, I think it's really important that, hey, I don't represent, I represent the association. I'm just one board member. Please submit something in writing. It really has a legal consequence. You could bind the association from a liability standpoint if you have some kind of improper communication, or you just say something that you think is innocuous and it turns out to be something more than that. So from a legal standpoint, it's really important to have things submitted in writing or submitted to management, as Steve said. Because we've seen real life scenarios where board members can unintentionally bind the association to an issue like that.
I'm going to take my moderator hat off just for a second and put my community manager hat on. And just to point out that a lot of the questions that we've posed to our panel has resulted back to dissension among board members and separation and division with homeowners and board members. And so I just want to challenge and welcome and encourage board members who are here with us today to go back to your boards, go back to your communities, and really think about how to bring your membership together, how to engage in better and stronger communication, and again, community events to help bridge that gap between the us versus them mentality. It's so important to create a harmonious environment, and it just was something that popped into my mind because it is something that we work very heavily on with our communities, and it's so important, again, to maintain that peace and harmony between and among board members as well as with the homeowners. And with that, yes.
Can I add one point to that? And your management company is absolutely excellent at this, and it's such a fundamentally important point. I think many people violate governing documents not just to be that homeowner. They do it out of ignorance or lack of knowledge. And that's why the more from management's perspective in educating owners, did you know that you have to take the trash cans back in the same day as the pickup? Did you know that you cannot park your vehicle overnight on the street without getting a permit? Once owners are educated along those lines, which you do very often with your boards, that takes away a lot of the conflict. There will always be that homeowner that should live on a property far away from every other homeowner. There's always one of them, unfortunately. But the reality is a lot of homeowners violate because they don't realize it's a rule. They don't realize it's in the CC&Rs, and the board has no choice but to enforce it. And if they don't, legally they waive their rights, and that's a breach of fiduciary duty. So I think a lot of education for board members and even for homeowners is so valuable because they really do get an understanding that we're not doing this just to fight. We're doing this because we have a legal obligation to do it. But let me explain to you what the documents say. And I think that's part of it. And I agree with you. I think social events, and I tell you, I think in a few months, God willing, we'll all be able to get back to some in-person communication. But this Zoom format has really worked well because people are coming together in communities to be able to attend meetings and participate too.
You bring up an excellent point there, Steve, because I too find that oftentimes homeowners don't know and certainly want to know. If somebody takes the time to explain something to them, they'll actually listen and will take that in. And actually, as this is our 8th annual ABCs of HOAs, where we offer education to our board members, we recognize the importance of educating homeowners as well. So we did about 12 to 13 short segments this year, which will be up on our HOA Organizers website and our Facebook page. It's ABCs of HOAs Homeowners Edition, and we do quick little segments to educate our homeowners. So I also encourage and welcome you board members to share the information with your homeowners. We talk about things like why board members make decisions, insurance, board meetings, certain things like that, just to help offer short little spurts of education to our homeowners. So the next question is for Cyrus, and we're going back to AB 3182. What do we do if the membership votes against the amendment relating to AB 3182?
Okay, so this is another controversial part of AB 3182, and I think there's a lot of discussion amongst all of the community association attorneys who practice, and we've all been discussing this through various email threads and chains, and I think I've seen a coming together of all the attorneys trying to figure out how best to facilitate these kind of questions for our clients and associations. So yeah, this is all untested. I think that's the first thing we need to make clear. This has not been tested in the courts. There's not a lot of direction. I will go out on a limb and say the statute is not as clearly worded or drafted as we would all hope and like. So I think the background here is the statute says that associations have to amend their governing documents by the end of 2021. So it doesn't say whether you need to obtain a membership vote. It's unclear about that. So let's say you do take a conservative, a safe approach and seek a membership vote. They vote no. Well, the statute also says an association could be fined if you willfully violate this statute. So if you seek a membership vote, the membership votes no, and you seek to enforce the statute anyway, the minimum thresholds under the statute, and you say, hey, we understand you voted no, but this is statutory and we're not going to enforce something that we know is against the law, would that constitute a willful violation by the association? I personally think it would not. Again, this is going to be very fact sensitive and dependent on what each association's legal counsel says, as always. But I think if the association attempts to vote on this, the board puts it out to a membership vote, people vote no. It might not even be a no vote. You might not be able to obtain quorum, which is really common in a lot of associations. So you may have different circumstances where you just cannot pass a vote. Well, then question is that a willful violation of the statute? And I think the association would have acted reasonably. And you could argue, some people will argue that you don't have to seek a membership vote in certain situations. So, you know, if you take that approach and you still went out of your way to get a membership vote, then I think you're really going out of your way to not willfully violate the statute. So it's definitely, you know, a tough situation for our associations. I think you need to comply with the law as best you can. And I think if somebody challenges that or says anything contrary to what the association attempts to do, you would probably put yourself in a defensible position to walk into a court and to say, look, this is what the statute says. This is what we're trying to do. We could talk about this topic for hours, quite honestly. There's a lot of back and forth on this, but I think if you do go out for a membership vote and they vote no, I think it's important for the board to say, look, we understand this, but we have to comply with the law and we need to enforce things as best as possible, assuming that's what your attorney says.
Surprise, surprise, 2 lawyers, 2 opinions. Can I weigh in if you don't mind?
Yes, please, go ahead.
I think Cyrus is right on this issue with regard to the willful compliance, non-compliance, but I don't think that's the issue that is of bigger concern, in my opinion, for boards. Here's the dynamic. Let's assume there's a provision and it says 25% and you cannot prohibit rentals, and there's language that's built in that's inconsistent with the new law. So it's very clear that if this provision goes out for the vote, and I believe the way the language is written, it has to be a vote to the owners. Whether that's right or wrong, I believe that's what it says. Now that should be corrected up in Sacramento, and when it is, they should just say, because the law is changing, that boards can vote to bring it in compliance. But up until then, I think it says it has to be a vote to the owners. So let's assume you vote and the owners say no or don't even vote, as Cyrus has said. Then the question is, we've got a provision that's unenforceable. The code says, the civil code says, that now your provision is void. If that provision is now void, does that make that provision completely unenforceable? If that provision is now unenforceable, does that eradicate any renter restrictions whatsoever in the community, other than, for example, no less than 30 days? But other than that, there may not be any rental caps because your provision said 50%. Now you want to say 25%, but that's just something the board's making up. The owners didn't vote for that. Therefore, does that void the entire provision? If it voids the entire provision, that opens up another whole can of worms. And I agree with Cyrus, this could be different opinions from different lawyers. Now the next question is, okay, what can the board do? Can they now create a set of rules that govern this? And I would say absolutely create a set of rules that address this issue. But then the next question that comes up, if you've got rules that are inconsistent with the CC&Rs and the CC&R provision is now void, does that mean that any rules that put rental caps or other restrictions per the code that are inconsistent with a void provision or a non-existent lease provision, are they overridden and therefore are not enforceable? Fabulous questions for lawyers to litigate down the line unless we can get Sacramento to fix it. But my advice is go ahead, move forward with the amendment to the lease, to the CC&Rs, simultaneously draft a set of rules to address this issue. But this is unfortunately a piece of legislation that didn't address the unintended consequences. And there's many more, as Cyrus says, that we won't even be able to get to today.
Yeah, and our firm is adopting rules simultaneously with CC&R amendments. So it sounds like we're on the same page as far as telling boards and telling associations that I would introduce a distinction. If the CC&Rs are non-existent as to rentals, that you're looking at a potentially different situation than if you have CC&Rs that are not in compliance with the new law. So, I think that's a distinction that is going to be important. I think adopting rules is certainly important, but if you have silence in your CC&Rs, if your CC&Rs do not address a rental cap, and now all of a sudden for the first time you're introducing a leasing cap, that's a different question, and I think that's important for boards to understand that attorneys really might have different opinions on what to do when in the situation where your CC&Rs are silent on rentals, because technically you're not out of compliance with the law in that case. Therefore, you're not required to amend your CC&Rs necessarily. So it's that really puts more of a discretionary kind of imprint on the association in that situation. So a little bit of a distinction on that, but yeah, I agree. I think rules are important, and this law takes effect January 1st. So that means as of January 1st, the argument that these out of compliance provisions are now unenforceable and completely eradicated, essentially, that argument takes effect on January 1st. So
yeah,
important.
even though, correct. even though they have to legally, so that there's no penalties, have this done by the end of next year. In reality, it's effective immediately. One last point I'd add to that is, here's where the business judgment rule, the judicial deference rule, plays a major role. Speak to your attorney. Get a written legal opinion based on your documents, what you should do, and commit your lawyer to that position. So if there's ever a lawsuit down the line, somebody challenging a rental, claiming damages because they couldn't rent and they should have been allowed to rent, or other way around, you have a written legal opinion from your attorney committing, you relied on that expert, and you took action based on that legal opinion that was granted. That's where legal opinions, and I keep emphasizing it, is so important for boards to make decisions based on guidance and advice, whether it's accounting, legal, or whatever the experts are, especially management.
Yeah.
You know, just when we think that we've gotten a handle on the new laws that have been presented, we get a whole new set of new laws that we now have to learn. I can't thank you enough, and I know our board members who are here with us today really appreciate all of the in-depth feedback that you both have provided regarding this topic. And I'm sure that there will be follow-up questions for legal counsel as we all navigate and learn to adapt to AB 3182. I'm going to move to Regina next. We have a couple of good questions, wonderful questions for her. So the first question is, are the underlying economic indicators that are driving the stock market in good shape?
Well, in the last 2 weeks, the stock market has hit record-setting highs that we haven't experienced in 125 years. So we're also we experienced the shortest bear market in history in March. So the underlying indicators such as consumer sentiment is very strong, and it's actually consumer spending that drives 75% of our GDP in the US. So unemployment, another indicator, has been declining steadily from 14.7% in March of this year to last reported at 6.9% in October. But it's important, and I talk a lot more about this in the presentation, but it's also important to remember that the stock market is not the economy, but rather a reflection of consumer sentiment. So if we look at the stock market over the last 100 years, we can see a constant upward trajectory. That means the stock market has recovered 100% of the time. So although the media headlines may want you to feel like it's all doom and gloom when it comes to the stock market, I advise my clients to focus on what we can control. It's buying quality investments in a well-diversified portfolio and taking into account various sectors and asset classes. Since we can't time the market, that works only 1.8% of the time, which means it doesn't work. Then it's really about having a well-diversified portfolio and then holding on to those investments for the appropriate amount of time. This type of strategy has shown to perform well in all situations.
Regina, thank you for that. I do have another quick question for you. We do have a lot of associations that directly employ staff, whether it be their community managers or maintenance personnel. But of course, they're not employment experts. And there is something that we are hearing about employers being required to provide a retirement plan to their employees. Can you share a little bit about what is required?
Sure. Yeah, actually, as you mentioned in the last question, laws are always changing, and laws, especially in California, changed as of January. And if you actually go to calsavers.com, you can read much more about it. But basically, employers who have 5 or more employees are mandated by the state of California to offer a retirement plan. And if they don't have a retirement plan, and this is going to happen over a 2-year period, but it's already in effect for companies that have 100 or more employees. And then next year it'll be 50 or more, and then finally 5 or more. And what's going to happen is the state of California is going to come in, they're going to fine you per individual that does not have a plan, and then they're going to put you into something that's the equivalent of a Roth. So it's not going to have any tax benefits for the employer. So if you've been thinking about it, or if you've been, just wondering whether it makes sense, there's a lot of benefits to designing something that's actually going to be much more beneficial both to you as an employer and to your employees. That's going to have tax benefits and, of course, the opportunity to save for retirement. And there's a lot of tax credits right now. So if you're starting a new plan, there's ways to actually do it where you might not pay anything for the first couple of years. So I definitely would encourage you to seek out, a financial advisor. Feel free to call me if you have any questions, and really take a look at how do you create something that's going to be beneficial both to you as an employer and to your employees.
Thank you, Regina. That's really helpful information. Our final question is going to be for Antis, and it is, are permits generally required to be pulled for roof maintenance or recoating of flat roofs?
Permits are not required to do maintenance on the roofing. However, roof coating, when considered, so roof coating comes in several different ways, but when roof coating is being applied to call it a new roof, because they can do that, that would then require having a permit pulled by the building department.
Thank you. That was very straightforward and helpful. I want to thank all of the members of our panel today. I want to thank all of you who also participated in our question and answers. If you did have any questions that we were not able to get to today, we do apologize, but we will certainly and gladly share our lovely panel their information with you so that you can follow up and reach out to them directly with questions that you may have. And once again, thank you. And we will continue with finalizing our presentations today.
Hello, HOA organizers and friends. My name is Robert Gross. I'm with Bergman Group. We're a construction management company focused solely on supporting the needs of HOA organizations. Our core values are very straightforward at Bergman Group. We help protect your investment. We advocate on the behalf of the association at its board. We defend the interests and mitigate risks. And most importantly, I think we educate our clients in the process of maintaining, repairing, and restoring occupied residential projects.
Hi there, my name is Wendy Weber and I run Insurance Services of the West here in Santa Monica, California. Thank you for attending today's ABCs of HOAs. We'd love to help you or answer any questions for your board or your members. Come check out our website, hoaspecialist.com, or give us a call, 1-800-535-3635. My name's Wendy Weber and I hope we get to talk to you soon. Have a great day.
I want to thank each and every one of you, and speakers included, for joining us today. As you saw and heard, we put together the best of our industry to make sure that you received the top-notch information. Rest assured, if you didn't get a chance to hear the speakers in the other breakout room, we'll be publishing both topics and both presentations on our website very soon. We'll be sure to send you an email to let you know when the presentations are up and available. And we would certainly appreciate you sharing the information with your fellow board members or other colleagues who might be board members. After all, it's really our intention to help educate and empower board members across the state of California. Thank you for dedicating your Saturday and joining us today. I want to personally wish you a very happy holiday season, lots of health, success, and happiness, and I want to wish you a happy new year. Have a wonderful rest of your day and take care. We'll see you soon.